we go.
How you, brother?
Good, man. It's Wednesday, Hump Day Wednesday. Happy Wednesday, everybody. How you stay, my man? How was your day today, bro?
Well, there's a lot of things. Excuse me. Got a frog in a frog. Frog jumped down my throat. Yeah. Well, we had a perfect show on Monday. Really, it was really good. Uh, I would like to say again, the in the news today, condolences to all the families that are affected by the senseless shooting. Now, I really got disturbed that one of the Congress senators today, senators in Washington, who talked about the guns, and he said, about the gun issue, and he said that honest people shouldn't be penalized for somebody's bad deeds, right? And he's right. But let me ask you this: if I put two people together, could you be able to tell me who's good and who's bad?
Nope.
That's the reason. That's part of the reason. That's why you have to put background checks that applies to everybody, okay? And let that weed out the rotten egg, because you won't be able to just by looking at the person, you're not gonna be able to tell whether they good or bad. So I think it was short sighted. It's just the fact that this guy did a very bad thing, and 10 people lost their lives, and I'd like to extend my condolences from Hawaii all the way over the sea to Colorado, and say I'm so very sorry to those families. It's senseless. It's senseless. But other than that, brother, I had an okay day. Had a little bit disturbing news tonight at work, of course, right before ready to go on. But I was able to hopefully manage some parts of it. It's running on remote control right
Yeah. Well, every day we find out new things. And yeah, condolences out to the families and all of those people in Colorado right now. That you know, I just the mandatory background checks. I mean, I think that's goes without saying. We have it here in Hawaii. It's very tough to get a gun permit here in Hawaii, and I just don't see why you wouldn't support that. I mean, I think the background checks is vital, and I'm believe me, I'm an avid gun owner. I own a couple of guns, and for defense purposes, for work. But at
now.
the end of the day, I mean, you got to screen them, and you got to make sure that these people are okay. And yeah, so that's a whole discussion in and of itself. But the other thing today, which was quite disturbing, I found out last night. Yesterday, I got the message, and then I today looked into it and saw that the House, House Bill 1286, initiated out of the House. It was
Right.
basically to strip the mayors of their powers as it relates to COVID-19 and travel. That in fact, House Bill 1286 was specifically targeted at Kauai. It was specifically targeted. There's no dispute about that. It was targeted for Kauai because Kauai went out and got the the bubble got basically opted out of safe travels, and it worked. It worked, and that, please, you cannot dispute that. It worked. That's why Kauai's numbers are so low. So the House Speaker Psyche decided, that wasn't good. No, we cannot, because it's confusing to the tourists. So we want everything to come under one rule, and the legislature decided that it should be the governor and the department, everybody else, blah blah blah, the state.
Mhm.
So that bill crossed over to the Senate. Basically, what happens is the Senate have their bills, the House have their bills, and then when they're done with it, it crosses over to the other side. Whatever survives the crossover goes to conference with both sides of the House. Well, anyway, the House sent it across to the Senate, and the Senate killed it last week, all over the news. 1286 is dead. 1286 is dead. I thought it was a good thing. Everyone celebrated that. Not everyone, but most of us celebrated that because we want the mayors, and I don't care what island you live on. We want the mayors because they know their islands best, and even the governor acknowledged that you have to treat each island differently. So the Senate killed it. It's called a deferral. They deferred it, meaning that they killed it. The House now taking the Senate appropriations bill. So now you have Senate Bill 266, which contains the funding mechanism to deal with the monies, the safe travels money, the federal money that's coming over for COVID relief and COVID security and COVID protection. That funding mechanism is in Senate Bill 266. Now that is pretty much a must-pass bill. You got to pass the bill because that directs the funding to where it needs to go. Mm-hmm. So that bill passes out of the Senate, it crosses over to the House, and then Psyche and his kumpads add the language from House Bill 1286 that was killed by the Senate last week, and they sneak it in Senate Bill 266, which is the appropriations bill. Because they know that bill has to pass, because that's what controls the funding. That's what puts the federal money into the specific line items for the state to spend. A sneaky move, in my opinion. So now Senate Bill 266 has a House Draft 1, which includes the language from 1286. So while it was killed in the Senate, the House now revived it, knowing that the governor didn't support it, knowing that the mayors don't support it, and the Senate doesn't support it, but they put it in anyway. Now the Senate is held hostage, in my opinion, because you got to pass the appropriations bill. Totally, it's just no different than what Congress does with the stimulus bills and all of that. They put their damn pork barrel projects in there, and I'm not talking about one party or the both of them, because they know it has to pass, and that's the only way they can get it passed. Sneaky. So I did speak to Senator Kochi today. I'm trying to get him. We're going to try and see if we can get him on next week to explain this. The problem is this, though, as I spoke to Ron Kochi today, because that appropriation bill, because that language is inserted with the appropriations bill, if Kauai decides to with this bill, well, obviously Kauai cannot opt out. If they did opt out, they would not be eligible for any of the federal funds because they would not be part of safe travels. So it's leverage. It's a horrible, and they do it after the crossover because now the public has no opportunity to testify. No notice. You know, the Sunshine Law doesn't apply to the legislature. So it's just sneaky. And I posted on about an hour, maybe 2 hours ago for our Kauai's delegation to respond. I want to see what their thoughts. I want to know, what was the rationale? What was the rationale for you guys to take the language out of a bill that the Senate killed and then stick it into an appropriations bill, which you know needs to pass? So anyway, Charlie, that came up. I'm terribly disappointed with the House again. And it's interesting how they maneuver and how they finagle, how they do things like that to get what Psyche wants. I'm curious to see how our delegation voted. And you guys can all check. Just go to the Capitol website and type in SB 266 HD1 because that's the House Draft 1, and you can track how your legislators vote. And we got to remember, in 2022, people, when election time comes, you got to remember things like this. This is horrible. It's terrible. It's disingenuous, and we need to track those legislators that support that the way this was done. We really do, and I mean it. And you vote them out. Period. End of story. Anyway. Sorry, Charlie, that was my rant for tonight. I'm excited about tonight's show. No, Charlie, you also find out the variant issue that you shared.
Well, first I'd like to say, what we have here is House Bill 1286 was first to clear up any confusion, right? And to clear up
Yeah.
confusion, you cause more confusion. That's what they just did. So, ladies and gentlemen, what we have here is a lesson 101 about politics. That to be a politician, you first have to be a magician. You have to have sleight of hands. When you have sleight of hands and you're able to move things around without nobody noticing, unless you got people like Mel Raposo, who literally just watches things move around at lightning speeds, breakneck speeds, or even slow like a turtle, you'll get the answer. That's all I'm gonna say. If you want to study the politics of Hawaii. As far as the variants, I was given this website, and I didn't think too much of it. It's called outbreak.info, and it's a useful tool, ladies and gentlemen, very very useful. And I should have uploaded it and bring it on, but anyway, you can change the location. Just type in Hawaii, and you have two Hawaiis. You can have one Hawaii that has a lower numbers, and I think it refers to Hawaii Island, the way it looks, and the other is Hawaii. There you go.
See, Charlie, yin and yang, buddy.
Yep. Okay, but this is what you're gonna find out. B1-351. That is the Brazilian. That is the South African variant. Okay. On the earlier report, there were 5. This one shows not detected, but there are 5 on the original report. The B117 is the UK variant. The B1427 and B1429 are both the California variants. The P1 is the Brazilian variant, which we haven't detected anything thus far. Okay. The numbers did rise because originally the one I did in my original post, we had for 429, we had 177. Now it's up to 183. And the 427 originally was 22. Now it's up to 26. So if you look at those numbers are climbing. Okay, that's a California variant. What's of interest, and I hope somebody can tell me, Charlie, you're wrong. You're explaining it wrong because I want to be wrong, is I looked up SE484K. Now, if you don't know what SE484K, that's an escape mutation. That's what it's called. If you were to look at it, if you were to Google it, it's a process in which it allows the virus to slip past the body's immune defenses. Okay? So basically, any of these variants can hop on the train and slip past the body's immune defenses. So that's why I think they talk about so much about the efficacy of the vaccine. The vaccine will take care, or it's generalized to take care the COVID virus itself. But as far as the variants, and they wonder what effects it has on that, this is where I think may be that answer. And that is that 484K is allowing these variants to sneak in past the body's immune defenses. So that is something that we need to keep an eye on, ladies and gentlemen. Let's just keep an eye on it.
Yeah, tonight, for those of you that just jumped on, we have Dr. Jonathan Dworkin, and he will. I'll bring that slide back up again. I'm not sure why the numbers changed. This was I just pulled it up right before we went on, so I'm not sure why those numbers went back to 0. But hopefully, Dr. Dworkin can share with us his insights, his knowledge on the variants and the mutations. Remember, early on, we were there. He is.
Here he
Jonathan
is.
Dworkin.
Beep, beep,
So we'll
beep.
bring in Dr. Dworkin, but thanks for bringing that up, Charlie. Thanks for sharing that, because I had no idea that we had so many cases here in Hawaii. You'll never hear it on our media. You'll never hear it. You just won't. It was so interesting today listening to the governor's interview on the Star Advertiser Facebook Live, how he is very cautious moving forward. A totally different outlook than the lieutenant governor. Completely. They asked him specifically. I'm not sure what happened to Doctor. There he is. The governor is saying that he's in communication with, because they specifically asked him about the quarantine or the vaccination or the vaccine passport. And he said he has been in direct communication with with the White House, the top COVID guy at the White House, and they're still having discussions and discussing the vaccination, the vaccine passport. And until that is determined whether or how safe the vaccinated people are and the effects, he's not willing to make any changes. And then they asked him about the inter-island travel. What did he feel about the inter-island travelers or inter-island travel lifting the quarantine or testing requirements? And it was very interesting what he said. He said, right now, he said, we were doing really good a month or so ago, but now he said it just like this. He said, the numbers are going in the wrong direction. The numbers are going in the wrong direction. And until we can get the cases in Hawaii stabilized, he is not going to change any protocols for travel. When you listen to the lieutenant governor, it's a completely different story. And that is, Charlie, you talk about it all the time about the messaging and why the messaging in any organization, it's so, and I know, guys, Dr. Dworkin is trying to get on. He's having some technical difficulties, but we'll get him on shortly. But in any organization, and I don't care if this is a for-profit corporation, a non-profit corporation, athletic team, whatever it may be, a classroom, it is vital that the leaders are all on the same page. And that's not what we're seeing right now. What's up, Doc?
He's got it muted.
Yeah, I just sent him the unmute request.
Yeah, you're muted.
Hello,
Doc.
can you guys hear me?
Now we can hear you.
Now we can hear you.
It's bizarre. I'm showing you as being muted. Oh, there you go. Oh. I think he's having some Wi-Fi issues.
Yeah, I think it sounded like the cookie frog got into his Wi-Fi.
So Charlie, what are your thoughts on that, man? I mean, you're the king of messaging. I mean, are you seeing the same thing as far as the top two leaders in our state not being on the same page?
There you go.
He went to his phone now.
No. How you doing,
guys
Doc?
got me?
Yeah, gotcha.
I don't know what's going on. There's something with the mountain.
Now, looking good, though. Looking good.
Thank you. How's it going?
Doing fine.
Going well. There's a slight delay, Doc, so I'm not sure what's going on, but
yeah, but it's all good. Can hear you.
But it's working. We can see you and we can hear you. So how have you been, my friend? How's the cookie frog?
They're still out there. It's been good. I feel like I'm a regular with you guys now. I need like a bar stool or something at your studio.
Well, it appears that way, and I can tell you that whenever we have Dr. Dworkin, you're one of those that when we post a promo slide up, everybody gets excited. Everybody wants to join us, and the numbers start climbing by the minute. So we appreciate you spending the time with us, Doc. Lots to talk about, but maybe just how's everything where you at? Is it mellow right now? Is it calming down or?
Yeah, it's been pretty mellow in North Hawaii. You know, we've had a few cases in the last, oh boy, I want to say month or two. I mean, not that much. You know, this is a small hospital. It's a rural hospital. You know, the stuff we've seen has been travel related, and it has been with negative pre-tests. But I can't say there's been a lot of it, at least in the hospital side of things. So that's been pretty mellow. And you know, the clinic in Waimea is now doing about 200 vaccinations a day here, you know, in North Hawaii, and that's just one of the clinics on the Big Island. So they're really banging, and you know, we're having more and more healthcare workers sign up to do it, and you know, obviously it's getting out into the community now too, where we have a lot of our elderly in the community are getting vaccinated. So that's been going well.
Well, Doc, let me ask you something. You know, I wish there was a crystal ball that, we all can have the answer to, and that is, we are still wondering about the efficacy of the vaccines itself. We know the published numbers are, but again, it's I always tell people, when you see numbers that are high, it's good, but it can also be subjective. That 5% might be on the back. You don't want to fall within that 5% category, then it can be bad. So it's all depending on how you use the numbers, right? When do you think we'll get the answer to the fact of whether or not, because it seems very, we had 3 cases already of healthcare professionals in Hawaii that got vaccinated, traveled, came back, and had COVID, even though they're being vaccinated. Now, I can only assume for that to have taken place to be detected, right? Because they came back, they had a negative test wherever they came back from, had to have negative. But they came back and they must have sought some type of medical intervention for that number to be caught. When do you think we'll finally get down to the right answer of whether or not, once you're vaccinated, you still can be you can still transmit this virus?
I'm smiling because I know my fellow doctors well enough to know that we're still going to be arguing about this stuff 10 years from now, and getting a bunch of doctors to agree on something, man, good luck. It's like trying to herd cats. Now that said, I think I think I can make a couple of comments on this that might help people think about it the right way. One is that, that initial number, 94 and 95%, those were prospective randomized trials that were done by the big companies, right? And they were only testing people who were symptomatic. You had to have symptoms and present and then be tested and then test positive. They weren't looking at asymptomatic transmission, right? And anytime you see something in a prospective randomized controlled trial, you got to ask yourself, okay, who's enrolling in a trial like that? It tends to be people who are very healthcare savvy, very healthcare literate, not always representative of the population. Sometimes they are, but sometimes not. Sometimes they're kind of the more hyper-vigilant people. I know, for example, a bunch of doctors that were in those trials as patients, right? So you always worry a little bit. Is this going to play out as well in the real world? Is this randomized controlled trial, going to translate in the real world to such a good number? And I was always a little bit skeptical of that. My thought was, it's good if your randomized controlled trial number is 94, 95%. That's a lot better than if it's like 50%, right? But that doesn't mean it's necessarily going to be quite that good in all settings in the real world. And what we have coming in now is more real world data, right? And we got to look at that a little differently. It tends not to be as high quality because it's not controlled in the same way, right? So it's not scientifically as pristine, but it's the real world. So you take the lumps and the bumps with it. And what we're seeing is that the efficacy is pretty high in these studies, and these tend to be retrospective studies. So for example, they look at like healthcare workers that were vaccinated and they compare them to healthcare workers that were not vaccinated. And then they count infections, right? Or, I saw some stuff out of Israel. Israel's got a very aggressive vaccine program. They're up to like 80% or something of their elderly at this point. So they were comparing their elderly who were vaccinated to age groups that were not as well vaccinated. And they showed some nice demographics. They showed that rate of infection and rate of hospitalization in the elderly was going down, even when it was still going up in that younger unvaccinated population, right? So we're getting those kinds of studies. We're getting big healthcare studies out of California and Texas, where they're comparing doctors who were vaccinated, nurses who were vaccinated, other people who worked at the healthcare facility to the ones who were waited. And they're finding that the ones who waited are getting infected and the ones that didn't wait are not. And the rates that are reported are variable, but you're seeing ranges mostly in the high 80s, some in the 90s, some as low as the high 70s. There's a range, but it looks like it's holding up pretty well. And the nice thing about these studies is a lot of them are also counting cases a little bit differently than the randomized controlled trial did. So they're not just waiting for people to show up sick. There was a healthcare system in Britain where they actually were serially testing all their healthcare workers, regardless of whether they had symptoms. They're just like, you work at this hospital, we're going to test you every 2 weeks, right? I think UCSD in San Diego did something similar. And those data are also showing that there's not only is there a reduction in symptomatic infections, but there's seems to be a reduction in asymptomatic infections too. So we're filling in the pieces here. And I think what we're finding is the vaccines do work. Now, that doesn't mean it's perfect. And there's a point that Paul Offit, who's a famous vaccine guy, whose stuff I like to read in Philadelphia, he makes. And one of the points he makes is if you look at measles, you take people that live in an area where nobody's vaccinating against measles and they get the shot. So they've been vaccinated against measles, but they're in an area where there's a lot of anti-vaxxers and everyone around them is not. Those people get measles, you know, at a certain rate. If you're not getting your measles shot, but you live in a community where 90% of the people are getting their measles shots, you're less likely to get measles than if you're vaccinated and you're in a community where there's a lot of measles circulating. So no vaccine is perfect. And when there's just a bonfire of COVID burning on the mainland, you're going to see people who've been vaccinated that get COVID. It's going to happen. It happens with other viruses, and it's going to happen with this virus. It doesn't mean that vaccines don't work. What it means is that there's a raging bonfire of COVID spreading around, and we're going to see some people get sick. And what I want to see with those people, here's what I'm really interested in when I hear about that. Someone is fully vaccinated and they test positive. Here's what I want to know. Did they have symptoms? Did they land in the hospital? Did they land in the ICU? Did anybody genotype that virus to see if it's developing resistance to the vaccines? We should be making sure. What's their viral load? How much virus is like pouring out of their secretions? You know, the Israeli data was kind of interesting. They looked at some of that stuff, and their patients that got COVID after vaccination had lower viral loads. So they're probably less contagious, and they were definitely less sick. And what that tells me is that even in those people, the vaccine's probably partly effective, right? So I was always sort of a guarded optimist on the vaccines. I'd say I'm more of an optimist on the vaccines. I am interested in these failures, though. I kind of want to know the details on them. And I saw a DOH report on some of the failures, and they weren't able to get their hands on the virus and genotype it. I don't know why. I don't know the circumstances for those patients. But whenever I hear something like that, I'm like, we need to follow up on this. I want to know their viral load. I want to smell that virus. I want to know exactly what that thing is, and the clinical history of the patient.
So I guess my follow-up question to that would be, if you know that the virus, I mean, the vaccine is effective once you get it to a certain extent. Remember in the beginning, we were always afraid. Symptomatic is one thing. Asymptomatic is what we were afraid of, right? Because number one, it would be the invisible monster, right? Floating around with a percentage of about between 40 and 45%, right, of the population would, if they did get it, would be asymptomatic. Now, with this vaccine, it basically turns everybody into an asymptomatic person, right?
Yeah, so it does look like, and again, the data is still limited. There's still a lot coming in, but it does look like if you get COVID after the vaccine, you're more likely to have either minimal symptoms or no symptoms at all. And then the next question where I think you're going with this is, what's their transmission risk? And it's probably not zero. It's probably not as high as somebody who's not been vaccinated and is just a virus factory. But it's probably not zero. And you know, what we want to get a handle on is what's the exact transmission risk. And you know, there's a few ways of looking at that. Like, do people get sick when they've been in their house and someone else in the house is vaccinated and they're not vaccinated, and that person tests positive? Do they spread it to their close contacts? You know, there are ways of getting at that, but it's a little tricky to figure out sometimes. And I suspect what we're going to see, you know, based on these data that are coming out of multiple countries now, is that the risk of transmission is going to go down. How much exactly it goes down, I don't know for sure. I don't think it's going to be as good as that 95% number for symptomatic infection. It's probably going to be a little bit lower than that. But I'm reassured that it's not zero, because that was a possibility at first. People were worried, well, it'll just prevent symptomatic disease. It won't prevent asymptomatic disease at all. And then everybody who can't get a vaccine or won't get a vaccine is at risk. But this, if we can knock down transmission as well as knocking down symptomatic infection, then at some point the epidemic goes into terminal decline. It's gonna crash. And that's what I'm looking for. And if you look at the countries that have higher vaccine rates than us, you see some of that starting to happen. And one of the things that was interesting with the Israelis was they got up to about 30-40% vaccinated, which is higher than we are now. Their epidemic was still blazing along, right? Then they got 50, they got 60. Their elderly got up to 60-70%, and then the epidemic in the elderly crashed. But it continued to go up in other groups, right? So their overall curve was kind of not so hot looking. And now they're getting into the younger groups, and now their curve is just crashing, and that's what I want to see. That's what I want to see in country after country after country. Chile is about 10% ahead of us. I think they're at about 40% or something. Their cases are still going up. So they've got a brisk epidemic. And what that tells me is we are not where we need to be yet. We could still have a surge of cases at the current level of vaccination that we're at, because there are places that are ahead of us in vaccination that are having a surge of cases, mostly amongst their unvaccinated people, most likely. But that's one way to think about it.
So I know Mel's going to get upset because I'm going to ask one more question. I'm going to throw a wrench into the fan on this one. So then if that is the case, bearing in mind of seeing the epidemic or the pandemic taking a nosedive, right? Then the question that I'm toiling with is, how long does the vaccine last? Because if it goes where it wears off, then we're back into this ping pong stage, because those who finally are catching the tail end, who may have it and be able to transmit it, and you're one of those who you're coming off that first wave, you might get it, and then you start that process all over again. So it's basically a teeter-totter going back and forth, right?
That's still a real possibility, and that's why I don't think we should be lazy at all about other types of infection control. We don't know the duration of immunity. I mean, the infection only hit the United States a year ago, so there's like almost nobody in the United States who has more than 1 year of immunity at this point, right? And then the vaccine immunity, we've only got a few months. So, it's certainly possible that the immunity could wane and people could start getting infected again. And it's also possible that we could have subtypes of virus, viral variants that emerge that are vaccine resistant. We call that vaccine escape is the term for that. And, what that looks like when it's bad, people were worried about that now with some of the variants. There's a variant in Brazil that's concerning. There's a variant that emerged in South Africa that's concerning. I'm sure people have been looking this stuff up and reading about it. And so far, the Johnson & Johnson vaccine was looked at in South Africa. It was only about 50% effective, but nobody ended up in the hospital or died. So that was good. And I think Novavax had a similar experience. Novavax is not yet licensed in the United States. We don't have as good data for Pfizer and Moderna. What we have are these kind of like in vitro experiments, basically test tube experiments, where they just take serum, from vaccinated people, and then they see if it prevents the virus from basically gobbling up some cells in a test tube. And it appears to be reduced efficacy, but still fairly efficacious. So I think that that's not true vaccine escape. To me, true vaccine escape is someone's gotten 2 doses of a Pfizer or Moderna and they end up in the hospital. They're sick, right? And if we start seeing that, that's a red line. In my mind, that's kind of like a bright red line. You got somebody who's fully vaccinated, not partially vaccinated, not infected 12 months ago, fully vaccinated, and they're in the hospital sick. When we start seeing that, then we've got failure. We've got real failure. And then we're going to need to update the vaccines. How likely is that to happen? Given enough time, relatively likely. I don't know how soon it's going to happen. One of the nice things about these mRNA vaccines is that they can be updated. So we could potentially do a round of booster shots in 6 months or a year. But it's not ideal to have to vaccinate the entire adult population every year. We'd obviously rather not have to do that. And we end up in a sort of like, flu-like scenario where we're vaccinating everybody every year with a partly efficacious vaccine. I would prefer something that lasts at least a few years, but we'll see. We don't know yet. We just don't know yet. And that's why I think the CDC has been fairly conservative, saying things like don't travel, continue to wear masks. It's because they want to get everybody vaccinated before these variants become entrenched so that we don't end up in a situation where we've got real vaccine failure 6 months from now. That's the situation we want to avoid. And that means we continue to do public health for at least another few months until we've got the thing really knocked down.
In case you guys are wondering, First of all, share this, guys. I forgot to put this up earlier today. Share, share, hit the button right now. As you can see, we're getting comments asking, who's this excited doctor? He looks so excited to talk about COVID. We are honored to have Dr. Jonathan Dworkin, and he's on the Big Island, as you can tell by the Koki frogs. Infectious disease specialist, epidemiologist, which one is it, Doc?
I'm an ID doc, a clinical ID guy.
Okay. So obviously by his articulation, you can tell he knows his stuff. So, you know, a lot has been talked about the variants. I'm not sure if you've heard of that outbreak.com website. This is I'm going to put up just a page for Hawaii, and maybe you can help us understand. This is, and I apologize for dropping on this to you. I blame Charlie because he just dropped it on us today. But does that make any sense to you?
Yeah, those are some of the common variants. So you're looking at, you know, B1429, B1427. Those are the ones that are commonly called the California variant. B117 is the UK variant. B1351 is South Africa. P1 is Brazil. And, you know, those are the ones that are of most interest right now. And, you know, there was I'm sure some of the listeners were in on this phone call that was about a week or two ago with Lauren Pang on Maui, where they were talking about the Maui outbreak. And, you know, the thing he said that really got my attention was how much of the outbreak over there is California variant. And, you know, what that tells me is that these things they came in within the last, you know, few months, and they're already endemic on Maui. So we have mostly California variant on Maui, and Oahu has had a smattering of other things. Oahu has had, I forget what the current number is. It's not huge, something in the neighborhood of 10, I believe, UK variant cases, and also South African variant has been described on Oahu, and it's not yet clear to me, you know, what the exact prevalence is of those, and that's the kind of data I would like to have as a clinical ID doc. It matters, you know. One of the more common medicines we're using now is a monoclonal antibody, which we give to people before they get hospitalized who are at high risk. And the California variant, it doesn't work on that one. So it's actually a drug-resistant variant. We don't think it's likely to be, you know, fully vaccine resistant. There's a big difference. So this is one of the beauties of vaccination. You get a vaccine, Mel, your body generates, you know, lots of different types of antibodies to the spike protein from the vaccination. And the same thing happens with natural infection. You get lots of different types of antibodies. So we call that polyclonal, meaning that there's lots of different antibodies being produced. So one mutation is not likely to cause you to completely lose your immunity if you have a vaccine or if you have natural infection. But these monoclonal antibodies, which are medications that we make, it's just one antibody. It's got one shape. So if you have a mutation, it can escape, right? And what that means is that some of the drugs that we're using aren't going to work as well, you know, that keep people out of the hospital. And if those become endemic on Oahu, which I suspect they will, you know, they're going to have to adjust their approach in terms of medical treatment. Whether or not they become vaccine escape variants, I mean, again, like I said, we don't have much evidence for that yet. But we do have some evidence, for example, with the South African one, that there's reduced efficacy. So those are the concerns. I think they're here, and there's just no question how they got here. They came in through travel. There's no other way that happened. You know, how do you get 50% of your variants on Maui be the California variant? They didn't spontaneously evolve that at the same time that California did. That was people from California coming into Hawaii. There's just no other way it happened, in my mind. So
or people from Hawaii going to California and bringing it back.
Good point. Yeah, exactly. That's right.
I know a lot of the attention is focused on visitors, but we have a lot of local residents traveling as well to the hot areas. And so the virus don't care. Virus don't care if you're a tourist or
virus doesn't care where you're from. It's not native. And honestly, I've seen more patients that are locals than visitors. I think because there's more transmission in the household when they come back. So that's what I see in the hospital is people come back and then their older relative gets sick and ends up in the hospital.
Well, the other thing too, Doc, and I think we had Dr. Pang and Dr. Amy Ho. They just did a study on the Maui post pre-departure testing, the random testing that they did for tourist visitors that were leaving, and they found that 7 in 1,000 passengers or mainland passengers were positive, and that's quite alarming. But the problem we have with the visitors is that they will not go to the doctor if they know that if they have COVID, they're going to be stuck in Hawaii for another 14 days. So I think a lot of passengers are getting on that plane sick because they don't want to go to the doctor, unless they're too sick and they have to go. If they got the little body ache and the fever or the headache or whatever, they may say, you know, screw this, honey. If I go get this checked and if it's COVID, we're stuck here for 14 days at our expense. So let's just go back home and get it checked there. And I would assume that's happening to some extent. But the question I have is about the variants. There's a list, and earlier that same website, they had numbers for the Brazilian and South African. I'm not sure why this current website is back down to 0. But there are many, many people out there right now that are still not vaccinated. And we're starting to see from other countries the effectiveness of different vaccines. You just spoke about that with some of the different variants. Is there a preferred vaccine, or is there at this point, understanding that these variants are evolving every day and new variants are popping up, should we have a preference in the type of vaccine that we get?
I think practically speaking, not really. I mean, there's 3 that are available in the United States. There's the Pfizer, the Moderna, and the Johnson & Johnson. And I would take any one of them that I could get. I took the first one I could get, which at our hospital was Pfizer. You know, people like to say, well, the Pfizer and the Moderna were like 94, 95%, and the Johnson & Johnson was lower. So Pfizer and Moderna must be better, right? Well, you have to understand the studies were designed a little differently. And, you know, they had slightly different efficacy endpoints, looking at different populations. So I don't think it's kind of an apples and oranges comparison a little bit. There's some very good advantages to the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. And I've had patients that prefer that like specifically ask me about that one, because the idea of getting some new technology is just kind of freaky to them. And they're like, you know, I hear that one's like a viral vaccine, and that's kind of older. And I'm like, yeah, it is. You know, it's a replication deficient adenovirus. So it's an adenovirus. It's a common cold virus that they basically beat down in the test tube so that it can't replicate on its own. And then they use it to give you the spike protein DNA so that you produce spike protein, right? So you get injected with this thing, and you're getting a dose of this virus that's not going to be able to replicate. And it's an older technology. It's a slightly older technology. It's been used in other countries for other vaccines. And I've had patients that are just like more comfortable with that. And I'm like, fine, you know, follow your bliss, go for it. Like and there's some advantage to that. You know, some people, and I generally like this, would rather use something that's been around for several years and that has that track record. You know, they've used it on 100,000 people. It was protective in South Africa against severe disease, you know, which is all that's the number one thing you care about. I wouldn't say that's all you care about, but it's the number one thing you care about. So, and it has other advantages. It's a one shot, so one and done. You don't have to do any special frozen storage type operation for it. You know, and I think the DOH, they were very happy. I talked to some of those guys when they got it. They were, ooh, we got Johnson & Johnson. You know, we can use this in all these places that we can't use the other vaccine. It's just another tool in the kit for those guys. And I would take any of them. I was just talking to a neighbor today. He wanted Johnson & Johnson. I was like, go for it. If Novavax comes out, I would be very happy with that one too. We got to see their data, but it looked good so far.
Remember, Charlie, when we had Dr. Jerome Kim on, I think Charlie asked him the question, Dr. Kim, which vaccine are you going to get? Johnson & Johnson wasn't even around yet. And Dr. Kim said, the first one that's available to me.
I think that's right. You know, AstraZeneca is having some issues. Their data came out. It was just a mess from the beginning. I think we're all a little bit down on them in the medical community. I don't know that they're going to get licensed anyway in the United States, so it's kind of irrelevant for us. The funny thing is, it probably is a perfectly good vaccine, but there were just some funny things they did in the clinical trials that were confusing and difficult to interpret. And they did have failure against the South African variant, in South Africa. So I think that's one that's reputation has certainly been tarnished. But of the ones that have been licensed in the United States, I think they're all pretty good. I was reading in the news just the other day, South Africa is trying to get as much Johnson and Johnson as they can right now. I mean, so they're all good if you've got a raging epidemic, which we do.
Hey, Doc, let me ask you, on that list that Mel put up, but I memorized that number so well. It's the SE484K mutation. And there, it's right there, the S44K. And they show that right here. They show that they have like 10 of them. Mutation concern. Okay. So in reading up on it, they call it the escape mutation, where it allows the virus to slip past the body's immune defense, basically the immune defenses, right? How is this a sort of like a Trojan horse where the virus can link up to this and get into you undetected? I mean, is that how it works?
Yeah, I mean, I think the way to think about it is, the spike is kind of the business end of the virus. So it's got this, and you've probably seen the electron microscope pictures of these things that,
Right.
they look like medieval battlements or something. There's these kind of fuzzy, like literally spikes that come out that then bind ACE and enter your cell. So they bind to the human receptor. Any mutation, any amino acid substitution in that protein has the potential to alter the final shape of the protein. And E484K, that one that you just mentioned, is just one of those spike mutations. I believe it's been found in the California variant. I'd have to double check, but I think that's one of the relevant ones in the California variant. And it does seem to have some effect on the function of the spike protein. But generally, one mutation alone is not going to allow something to escape your whole immune system, because with vaccination, like I said, your body, your immune system is highly evolved. It's producing antibodies to multiple different aspects of that spike protein. It's trying to glob onto the thing any way it can. And it tends to be when you have a series of mutations that the thing becomes really clinically significant. So if you look at like the California variant or the South Africa variant, you'll see actually lists of mutations, right, that are associated with those variants and sort of define them, right? And when you see those operating in conjunction with each other, some of them may increase transmissibility. So I think the one from the UK, for example, gave it an advantage in terms of replication. So those patients had really high viral loads and they were more contagious, right? But there wasn't as much in the way of vaccine escape or immune system escape. Other ones tend to give it an advantage in terms of resisting the antibodies generated against wild type virus, against the original, virus. And then some of them have both of those things. And I think South Africa, for example, has both, right? They think it's a little bit more contagious and may also be a little bit more resistant. So the question is, does that keep happening? And if it keeps happening, where do we end up 6 months from now, a year from now? So,
and the reason why I asked you that is because when I first was turned on to this that site, that outbreak.info, where this information comes out, it's I guess a group of individuals like yourself, scientists, the whole gamut, that contribute to updating this data. And like Mel said, the South African was not detected in the one that he showed, but on a previous screen a couple of days ago, it showed that there was five.
Yeah.
So I know, I think it's updating itself continually.
It's here.
Yeah.
There was a news report, I think, on March 8th, and then there was another one about a week later in Civil B.
So
it's here and it's on Oahu.
So the question, I guess the question remains then, with these mutations, especially like the 484K and those like it, there's always, I guess, this is a natural process, right? Where it'll come in and it'll sneak whatever it can, because that's what makes, they list it down as a mutation of concern. If it wasn't that to be concerned about, I think they wouldn't even put it up on the board, right? So I guess, for lay people like myself who just enjoy looking at this stuff, and for others that, I kind of showed them in the post, hey, go to the site, look it up. It's pretty neat. How do we just from a lay person standpoint look at it and say, okay, what should be concerning to us? If you were someone to latch onto that website, what numbers would you be looking for that would pique your interest?
Yeah. I mean, it's funny you mentioned this because it's like, in some ways, it's kind of a golden age for virology right now. When I was in fellowship, I memorized all these HIV resistance mutations because we'd have patients that would, be resistant to this drug or that drug, and we'd have to pick a new regimen for them. And I had to learn some of these things. I never thought in a million years that regular people would be talking about this stuff and be interested in it. It's really kind of esoteric stuff. But now every new mutation gets posted online and people are following it. Again, what I look for is the ones that are more, well, there's two things that I think are interesting about this. First of all, how does it happen? One. And second of all, so what are the things that we're doing that are stupid that make it more likely that this is going to happen? That's something I want everybody in the public to be kind of thinking about. And then two is, what are the ones that we really need to worry about, and how do we sort that out, right? And I think that's kind of where your question was going. A lot of doctors themselves, when these first get reported, don't know. So something gets reported, hey, we're seeing this variant. It's emerging in a place like Brazil, where there was already a high number of infections previously, and now there's a second wave of this new P1 variant. What does that mean? Well, we don't know. At first we just don't have enough information. So they post the genotype on a website. Everybody gets excited. Bunch of breathless reporting on it, right? And then they got to do the studies to figure out what it actually means. And the things that I look for are, is it more contagious, right? Does it make people more sick? Does it kill people more? Is it escaping natural immunity or vaccine immunity? Is it escaping monoclonal antibodies, the drugs that we're using for people? So I start looking for stuff that investigates that. And usually when there's a new variant described, we don't know that at first, but if you pay attention, within a few weeks, those papers start coming out. And I kind of collect them. I've got I'm emailing them to myself so I don't lose them, so that I can keep track of it all. And what you'll find is, for different variants, there's different patterns, right? Some are more contagious, some are more likely to escape immunity. So I don't think people need to obsess every time there's a mutation in a newspaper report. I think what you want to do is kind of be like, okay, that's interesting. How did that happen? Where did that happen? What do we know about it? And the thing that I really would worry about is someone who's been vaccinated. People who have been vaccinated are getting admitted to the hospital with it. To me, that's when it's hitting the fan, right? And we haven't seen that yet. So what we've seen is stuff that's along the line towards that, but not quite there, right?
So,
go ahead. I'm sorry.
So given what I guess the $1 million question that many of the viewers have is that, with regards to the validation, it seems almost validating with our guest that was brought on Monday, Dr. Peng and Dr. Ho, that going, when the lieutenant governor first said that, well, we'll probably slip through the cracks of maybe 1 in 1,000. Well, I think the study that was done kind of validates what people like yourself, Dr. Evelyn, Dr. Kapono Chong Hansen, even Daryl Garrett, they said it was more like 7, maybe even higher, 7 per 1,000, right? And so that's what those numbers came out with. Is that alarming to you? I mean, it's alarming to me, thinking that, well, it went undetected, but somehow we got a hold of it. So I wonder how much more is there. And it's like, well, if we're going to do a test batch of 75 and we got 0, well, great. But what if the infected one was test batch number 76? We missed it by 1, but it didn't fall into the group. There's always this hit and miss that can be inevitably dangerous if we're not careful. How do you think about those numbers?
There's a lot of different numbers that have been thrown around for how safe is safe travels, right? I don't know where that 1 in 1,000 number came from. I think it was based on some sort of back of the envelope calculation or something. I don't know. When they did, so there's a few sources of actual data that we have available in Hawaii, right? So there's the post-arrival testing on the Big Island, which is still going on, by the way, guys. Like, this has been flying under the radar here. And I was barely even aware of it. I remember when we had the conversation with the county months ago and they set the thing up, and I wasn't even sure it was still going. It's still going. And I had to take a trip over to Oahu because I haven't seen my mom in months. And it was my first time traveling. Like, I barely traveled at all, other than to come from Oahu to here. And so I went and saw my mom. I come back, and when you land, they say, okay, you're inter-island. Have you pre-tested? Do you have a letter of exemption? Okay. Are you trans-Pacific? And anybody who flies from Honolulu over to say Hilo, if they're really truly inter-island, then they follow the inter-island rule. But if you're somebody who flew from like Seattle to Honolulu and thought you were going to sneak in, they will pull you out of line. They'll be like, you're a transpac, buddy. Some very polite and well-armed National Guardsmen will pull you aside and put you in the transpac line, and you get your swab. And if you don't, so the question is, what effect does that have? If you look at their data, I don't think they found a ton of COVID. Initially, it was something like 1 in 1,000, and then when the wave peaked on the mainland, it was up to about 2 in 1,000. But you also have to consider the psychological effect that having that extra layer creates. Or if you think you might have COVID, are you going to take a trip to the Big Island knowing that that's waiting for you? I think it probably dissuades a certain amount of like irresponsible behavior. I was nervous about going through that line. I made sure I had all my paperwork lined up. I didn't want to, get a hassle there. So I think it probably has a benefit that is not easy to measure with the numbers. And the numbers showed anywhere from what the lieutenant governor said to about twice as high, right? Then we had DeWolf Miller, who did his post-arrival testing at 3 to 4 days, and like nobody showed up for it. There was a very small percentage of people that showed up for it. And that was, what we were worried about, right? That would be the problem with that approach. And it showed a number that was higher than 1 in 1,000. I can't remember the exact number, 3 to 4, depending on where it was. But sampling problems, all kinds of sampling problems. And then we have Lauren Pang's study, which I think was probably the best of the lot, because he had the ideal interval, right? He had a week. They pre-test, they come to Maui, they're leaving Maui, he's got a high acceptance rate, and the average was 7 days. That's like, whoa, that's perfect. That's what you want to see, right? And his was 7 in 1,000. But even his, he had a couple hundred tests. What exit terminal were they allowed to use at the airport? You could pick that apart from a sampling perspective and say, well, we need a bigger sample, or we need to repeat that a few more times to really pin it down, right? Because I think the absolute number of cases was like 2 or 3 or something. It wasn't a high number, right? So what you really would need to do is do that on a larger scale. But I think that is the right way to do it. Okay. So anyways, what I'm getting at is none of this data is like ever going to get published in the New England Journal of Medicine. None of this stuff is like going to blow the doors off the hinges as being super definitive. It's imperfect information. It's all imperfect information. You know what's not imperfect is the real world experience. And that's to me what speaks the loudest. You saw Wave and Kauai when they were in safe travels. They closed safe travels. The wave went away, right? That was a real epidemiology experiment in real time, right? Maui stayed in safe travels. Maui's now got, a per capita rate of COVID that's close to some cities on the mainland, and it's all mainland COVID. Well, not all mainland COVID, about 50% mainland COVID, right? We can genotype it. We can fingerprint the guy. We know he's from the mainland, right? And they've got a big wave. So that speaks louder to me than these arguments over exactly what the number is on any given day or any given weekend.
And I think that's what we've been saying. I mean, there's no way that the numbers cannot be disputed on Kauai. We just had, today we didn't get any cases, but the last 2 days we had 2 each day, travel related. I mean, we know that it's coming from the mainland. We know it's coming from travel. Now, we are, like you said, we are so close to the point in time where we'll be getting valuable data and information, because it's, again, relatively new virus, very new vaccine, but the data is starting to populate throughout the world on the effectiveness and the rate of transmission after vaccine. The CDC is very concerned about travel. In fact, they just came out yesterday or the day before saying, please do not travel right now because of what's going on in Florida and other states with spring break and the large gatherings. We've seen it on Oahu. wouldn't it be wise to wait until we get the data that can either validate or invalidate the prediction that in fact vaccinated people are not able to transmit the virus? I think that we're looking. The governor made it clear today he's not ready. He's been in communication with the White House. He's not ready to change anything or move towards the vaccine passport. But the lieutenant governor is ready to go now. If he had his way, it'd be done. But we are. Would you agree that we're very close to getting, and very close meaning, in the next 6 months, to get some really good data that can give us a good indication of whether or not the vaccines are preventing people from passing the virus?
Yeah, I think, like I was saying at the beginning, I think there's more and more of that coming out. And, ultimately, it may well make sense to do a vaccine passport kind of system. If you can show that being vaccinated dramatically reduces your risk of both getting sick and transmitting the virus, then that's a legitimate way to go. And there are some other countries already doing that. And it serves two purposes. One is to, allow things to reopen, which I think is the thing that everybody wants in the tourism industry in Hawaii. But the other purpose is it also encourages people to get vaccinated, because you can do more with that passport. And if you're still a public health risk to your neighbor, then there's just less stuff you can do, and that's just reality. And we shouldn't apologize for that. If someone is able to do it, and we have data that it's safe, and they don't do it, it's not just a decision for themselves. It's a decision that impacts their community as well. And they may not be able to do as much stuff that has transmission risk associated with it. And that's been the case for vaccines for many years, with public schools and all kinds of other things. So I think ultimately it probably is the right idea. I think I personally am not comfortable walking out on that limb until some of these transmission studies have been, better vetted. A lot of the stuff I was talking about at the beginning hasn't even been published yet. It's up on, pre-peer review websites. So I'm reading this stuff on like Medrix and stuff like that. It hasn't even been peer reviewed, let alone published. There's certainly no statement from the CDC on it saying, oh yeah, this is legit, transmission is reduced 90%. We don't have that yet. So I'm not telling anybody to travel based on vaccine status until that stuff is vetted, it's peer reviewed, it's published, and we have some very, very smart people that have had a chance to look through it and update the recommendations. Then maybe it's a perfectly legit thing to do. But I agree with you. I don't think now is the time to be doing that. Actually, just the opposite. Now is the time to be trying to drive the curve down to zero so that we don't end up with an escape variant that sinks the whole project 6 months from now and shuts us down again. Because that's sort of the worst case scenario, I think, at this point is, because we're doing dumb things like having 30,000 people come in on spring break, that we end up having, a variant emerge that is vaccine resistant. And then 3 months from now, 4 months from now, it's shut it all down again. And there needs to be some medium term to long term thinking here that is not just so desperate to get things open as quickly as possible that we end up shooting ourselves in the foot.
Mm. Hey Doc, I got a question from one of our viewers here, and they just wanted to know that if you've come in contact with any patients that were not technically diagnosed with COVID, but now has pleural effusions, could that be evidence that the patient had COVID?
Pleural effusions are really a non-specific thing. What a pleural effusion is it's basically when you breathe, your lungs expand, right? And there's when you're healthy, there's no space between your lung and your chest wall. The lung is filling up the thoracic cavity, right? A pleural effusion, what that means is that there's fluid that forms between the lung and the wall of the chest, and then the lung can't fully expand. So you've basically got some dead space in there full of water. And that can happen, or full of whatever. It can be blood, it could be anything, depending on the disease. But those pleural effusions happen in a number of different diseases, and they're not very specific. The most common finding I've seen with COVID radiographically is there's kind of a classically described, peripheral ground glass pneumonia. So you look at the chest X-ray, the chest CT. Early on, when we didn't have testing and we were doing more CTs, you would see these patterns on chest CT that were very, very characteristic. But they were not pleural effusions. Now, does that mean nobody gets a pleural effusion? I wouldn't say that. I'm sure it's happening. But if I see a pleural effusion, I'm not like, that guy's got COVID. I'm like, I gotta tap that pleural effusion and figure out what's causing that. And the COVID tests at this point are pretty good. And if somebody's repeatedly testing negative, it's probably not COVID. It's probably something else.
Okay.
Real quick, I know, again, man, we know we got an awesome speaker when the hour goes by so quick. Someone posted earlier on the thread that there's a SARS-CoV-2 that is popping up in the schools on Oahu. I have not heard that. Have you heard that? Or Charlie, have you heard that? That just popped up a little while ago. I have not heard a thing about SARS-CoV-2. Did you hear about that, Doc?
There's a cluster report that's done by the Department of Health weekly, where they break down, where they're seeing clusters. And I looked at I think it's March 18th. There might have been, I can't remember exactly where, there might have been one cluster that I saw that was associated with what they call educational setting. And I don't remember the details of it. They don't give any, specific names or addresses. But I do believe I saw something like that on the last cluster report. I don't know if that's what this person is referring to. I mean, if you look at those things each week, though, and I encourage people to check those out. You go to the DOH COVID website and you can see the cluster reports. They'll tell you for each island the kinds of places where they're seeing cases. And the most common places have been workplaces, home social gatherings, restaurants and bars. Maui's got a prison problem at the moment. That's been intermittent depending on when and where. But the most common ones I see week after week, I've seen education a few times, but the most common ones I've seen have been bars and restaurants. And by the way, we opened the bars on Oahu right before St. Paddy's Day, which was, it's what happened. So we'll see if that leads to anything. And then these big social events. So, funerals, weddings, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I noticed on the cluster report that I looked at, they had hospitality facilities, restaurant, bars, and there was another one that shows up quite. Maybe it may have been educational setting, but who knows what that could be.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's still not clear. That's why we keep praising our island, because they give us a report with every case that pops up, and it's real time, and it tells us traveler or returning resident. Is it? They give us the whole scoop whenever we get it.
I trust Janet Bergman to do that stuff, probably better than anybody. And I think she had spoken earlier about travel related and how they dig a little deeper on Kauai, and they look to see about concentric circles going out from the original introduction. So, a lot of stuff doesn't get tagged as travel related if there's not an obvious travel link. But if it's 2 or 3 chain links removed, obviously that's still travel related if it was introduced from someplace else. She does a very good job of that. I remember about a year ago, we really had almost no information. And, I'm grateful that they're now doing these cluster reports. I take a look at them. One thing that's shifted is now that the vaccine program is rolling out, a lot of the conversations are all just about vaccinate. And, the hospitals have not been as full, at least on Oahu, has had, I think they were down to like 10 cases or less within the last week or two. And, it was up to 100 in August or more. So what tends to happen on the policy side, and I don't agree with this, but it's just reality, is if the hospital is getting slammed and the hospital starts screaming, that's when you'll see the mayor start to shut things down. And if the hospitals aren't screaming, then they just, they're like, okay, there's stuff in the community, but we're not gonna restrict business. This is the way a lot of people think. And I think what that misses is the medium to long term as to what happens with emergence of new variants and whatnot. And where are we 3 months from now or 6 months from now?
Okay. Well, I guess when it's all said and done, about the schools, there seems to be this great debate between and it pops up all the time, the difference between 3 feet and 6 feet. I get asked the same question. what do you think, Uncle Charlie, between the 3 and 6 feet? I said, well, there is a 3 feet difference between the two. That's about it.
Yeah.
That's all I'm gonna say. But what's your take on it? Between, what some is considering acceptable and some still are not considering acceptable when we talk about 3 feet distance and 6 foot distance.
So I think the CDC updated that, and I clicked on the link through to it, and I think it was referencing some study that was done in Massachusetts where they looked at schools that had different policies on distancing, and they didn't see a big difference, and then they concluded, okay, it doesn't really matter that much. And I don't know how you control, for all those kids bouncing off each other like ping pong balls to know that they were really 3 feet or really 6 feet. I'm a little skeptical of stuff like that. We know that this is an airborne virus, that it's mostly droplet spread, but that there is probably some airborne spread. We know that ventilation matters a lot. That's why outdoors is a lot better than indoors. So, there was an excellent article in Civil Beat, I think by Christina Jedra a week or two ago, talking about ventilation. And she really did her homework. She interviewed a lot of different experts from around the country on it. And she was talking about how a lot of our buildings in Hawaii have not had any kind of ventilation standard updated in decades, right? So, we've got these old buildings where you basically don't ventilate at all. And no doubt some of those are schools. And can you really control for what's spreading around in those types of environments? I think we probably should update ventilation codes and assume we're going to get hit with another pandemic at some point, and have our buildings that we're building from this point forward be more pandemic resistant. Whether or not, how that changes how you feel about schools, I think depends a little bit on how important you think it is to have kids in schools. And we've talked about this before when I'm hearing, from my perspective, teachers are essential workers. Kids need to be in school. And early on in the vaccine program, we really pushed. I was harassing people in the state saying, you got to make sure teachers are vaccinated early. Not all the states were doing that. But I wanted to make sure that they were, because they're essential workers and they need to be able to work. So I'm a little disappointed that despite the fact that we gave about 10,000 or 15,000 vaccines, I don't know what the exact number was, to teachers, and they were near the front of the line, that we're now getting into March and most kids are still at home. We haven't figured out how to do this. I don't think that that's right. That's just how I feel about it. And we are not going to be able to reduce the risk of transmission to zero, but we can, by vaccinating the teachers, make it much, 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 much safer. And that's what we're doing. And this also gets back at the priorities. If you zoom out and you look at the big picture, we've got 20, 30,000 visitors arriving a day during spring break. So, spring break is on. We've got, bars and restaurants open. St. Patty's Day is on. We've got weddings now. We've got funerals. All that stuff is going on. But we don't have kids in school. How did that happen? And what is that? What does that say about us as a state? What does it say about our priorities? What does it say about the priorities of the leadership of the state? I don't think it's attractive. It's not a good look for us. It's really not.
It's very clear, and it was clear from day one that the priorities of the state was tourism. That's just, I'm sorry, that's the truth. And if you're offended by it, then I apologize. But that's what it's very clear and obvious that was the priority from day one. I agree with you. I think all kids need to be in school. I also believe that the teachers need to be protected to the fullest extent, and that means getting them vaccinated. One of the things we are finding out is very good is that this vaccine is preventing people from getting really sick and dying. I think that's the numbers across the world, around the world, is showing that to be true. So the vaccine, I think, is important, but again, we're still not clear on how transmissible this thing is after vaccination. But if everybody was vaccinated, and if everybody wore a mask and washed their hands and avoided the huge gatherings, then you wipe out the virus, really. You would actually crush this virus. And that's what we got to, the mindset has to change and get our kids back in school in a safe environment.
Yeah, I agree. I'm for both things. I think, to the extent that we can improve ventilation in schools, I think we should do it. It's unlikely that we're going to be able to rebuild all the schools in 2 months or 3 months. So there's going to have to be compromises there just as a practical matter. But certainly somebody should be looking at that in a more academic way and trying to come up with policies and procedures to improve ventilation in schools. Teachers should have access to masks that work. Teachers should have access to vaccines. Kids should mask. One thing I've noticed, Mel, is that the private schools are open, and they've been open for months. And so we now have this split where kind of wealthy, advantaged kids are all doing in-person school. Not all, but many of them are doing in-person school. And the kids that are depending on the public school system are doing Zoom school. I pulled my kids out of school last March, I think a week before the schools closed, because it was starting to smell bad. And I was like, this isn't going to go well. So I understand the school closure thing. I think particularly early on in the epidemic, we didn't really know where the thing was most transmissible. We know from other viral infections that schools can be important in terms of viral transmission. And what we found over time is that, there are absolutely transmission events in schools, but it doesn't seem to be the main one for this particular virus. So my kids are still home, but the reason my kids are home is because I don't want them doing Zoom school. I don't think they learn anything. And they can learn more just from talking to their mother and I. They hated Zoom school. But I would love to get them back in the classroom, provided that there were some safety procedures in place that made sense. And that's where we have to go. It's frustrating that part of the economy and the culture doesn't seem to be a top priority. I just wish, someone at the state got as angry about this failure to get kids back into school and was willing to spend money on things like ventilation and PPE and the vaccine program and policies and procedures, as they do get excited about, the various safe travels arrangements, but that's where we are.
Well, like they always say, right? I don't think we'll send any firemen into a fire without any protective equipment. So if they can do it for the fire department, I'm pretty sure they can do it for school teachers. Get them properly equipped, get them vaccinated, get them properly masked up. So, they're there to teach. They're not there to worry about the possibility of them catching something should something happen. You need them up there. It's almost like a pilot, right? That's why these big planes got 3 people in a cockpit. You got one driving, you got the other one watching the controls, and you got one worrying about the communication. You're not going to have only one pilot do everything because there's just too many things to worry about, especially when you're bringing that big bird down for a landing. Last thing you want to do is say, well, did I forget the coffee cup, not knowing that you're ready to hit the ground. So I think it's one of those ideas to say the least. But it's been very interesting tonight, brother. It's very interesting.
If the schools was a revenue generating entity, then I can guarantee you the kids would be back in school today. If schools generated revenue to the state in the way of a tax, like how about charging a student tax like we do a tourist tax? If it was generating revenue, they'd be back in school, trust me. But it isn't, and that's why it's not a priority. It's shameful. That's just the reality of Hawaii, and it's not just us. Many states are facing the same dilemma. Many states.
Yeah.
And
I think that's a good point. It's easy to beat them up, but it's been a problem nationally. Maybe if kids chose who the next governor was, they'd be back in school. Or maybe if they whined as much as healthcare execs and travel industry execs, they'd be back in school. But they don't do any of those things, right? They just kind of, sit at home and fall further behind and are ignorable as a constituency. So I think we have to be their voice,
I agree. We had some student athletes on our show one night who rely on school for their athletics so they can pursue their educational career with the help of their athletic ability. None of these kids are getting looks anymore. No one's playing sports. But how does a kid feel when they cannot go play sports, but they can see all this visitor activity, the street performers out on Waikiki, all the visitors on the beaches without masks, all the parties, they see the videos on Facebook, they see it on the news. It's so hypocritical. It's so frustrating, but Doc, we've spent a lot of your time, man. We're like 10 minutes over. I apologize. You can send a bill to Charlie Eo. Did you have any
Pleasure.
kind of closing comments that you wanted to share to our viewers? We got a captive audience here. They're very appreciative, by the way. The comments are all very positive.
No, I appreciate the opportunity to come on and appreciate what you guys are doing. And I think we got to stick together. There's going to be a bumpy landing here, and there's going to be issues to address coming out of this. Assuming that we come out of this in relatively good shape, have we done things to prepare our state for the next pandemic? What does the tourism industry look like going forward? What do we do to make sure that our education issues are addressed? There's going to be a lot of stuff coming out of this, and I think most of the people who watch you guys, share your values. And one thing the one nice thing that's happened in the last year to me from this pandemic is that I found lots of really great people all over the state on all the different islands. I've worked with a bunch of the Kauai people, and I think they're wonderful people, and made friends on Maui as well. And we need to keep the community together, because there's going to be a lot of important decisions to make coming out of this.
Yep.
Thank you, Doc. Charles?
Well, as always, I'd like to say thank you so much to Dr. Dworkin for joining us tonight. It's much appreciated. It's a long time waiting, and it's always good to hear your ideas, your sentiments with regards to a topic that you are very, very familiar with. And thank you for sharing your insights with the viewing audience. To our viewers out there, I hope you had a nice time with us tonight. I do want to let you know that because we're coming in for a landing, it seems that way. Some may agree that the approach angle might be a little too steep, and some might feel that the approach angle is causing a stall. But definitely, we need to somehow get together and glide in smoothly so nobody gets hurt. So one of the things I did today was I reached out to HTA and HLTA, Mr. John DeFries and Mr. Mufi Hanneman, because I was concerned about, with everything that's happening now, with people asking kindly of our visitors to please put on a mask and getting a very hostile response, even to the point that some of our kupunas are being spit on. Some of our families are being assaulted. That, to me, I already see the temperature is rising and something bad may happen. And I hope and pray it never does. So I reached out to them to maybe they can discuss with their hotels to put out, more education to their members, to reach out and, tell the people that, hey, we want to make sure that we can coexist, but let's make it a pleasant one. Doesn't have to be adversarial. And again, to me, there's a lot of blame to go around, but from day one, it's always been the messaging. How do we send the message out? How do we make sure that the message gets out correctly? And because the way the messaging has been, it just causes people, by just through a natural process, to go after each other. I said, there's got to be a better way to send the message out that, we're in this fight for our lives, and that we got to work together to defeat it. And one thing that we said early on is that, remember when we first started our show, Mel, everything was about flattening the curve. Well, the only mistake that I think the state did is we flattened it so well, they didn't pay attention to it. They backed off the pedal and they let the boogeyman rise back up again. So, if you're going to flatten something, let's just make sure it stays down and it's counted out. That's why referees count to 10 before they count you out of that match, right? Once you get knocked out, you reach 10, you're out. There's no way of coming back up. So I hope and pray that, we can all coexist with these troubled times. Thank you.
Good analogy. Good analogy. It's like me being fat. I wasn't born fat. You start gaining a pound, you go on a diet, you lose your weight, and then if you're not careful, you're right back to where you was. And I think the state gotta realize that you gotta really focus on the mission. And the mission right now is to provide a safe environment for our locals and our visitors. And we cannot, when you get the little victory, assume the major victory and act on that as if we had won, and we haven't won yet. Charlie, your analogy about the airplane coming in for a landing, I tell you, and my dad's on here. My dad said you're a great school teacher, Doc. He said he really enjoyed, he was educated tonight, so thank you. But we were
Thank you.
student pilots. We were all student pilots, and part of student pilot training is you got to do an aborted takeoff, aborted landing. In other words, you're coming in for a landing, you see the lights, everything is lined up, and then you got to change course. Something came up, you got to get out of there, and you got to throttle up and pull your nose up and get the heck out of Dodge. And that's what I think is going to happen. I think we're coming in for a landing, but unfortunately, we're gonna have to readjust. So we just got to be very flexible. And like you said, Doc, we're in this together. This show has, like you said, has created like an ohana for all of us. We feel like we know everybody. And when this is all said and done, Charlie's going to do this huge concert. I know that you know about this. We've talked about it. And I know he thought I forgot about that, but I haven't. And real quick, just indulge me for a minute. I want to share, if you're on Kauai, Pop Warner. Let me get rid of this here. Hold on. If you're on Kauai on Saturday, March 27th, this Saturday at 7 o'clock or at 6 o'clock, gates open, free movie. It's a theater night. You go up there and you stay in your car and you'll watch the movie, and there's popcorn and there's food, there's patele plates, but this is for our families here on Kauai. Please patronize Kauai Pop Warner. Grove Farm donated this high-tech outdoor movie theater system to Kauai Pop Warner, and they're using it. And we want to share it with you all. And let me just show you what the movie is. I think it's this way. Boom. There we go. Sonic the Hedgehog, guys. James Marsden and Jim Carrey. Please, please, please. I'll post this up on my page tonight. Get up there. All you gotta do is click on that little code, the QR code, and it'll take you to the link to get your free tickets. Get all the kids out there, please. This is one way we can help the community, get our people together, and some sort of normalcy. It ain't a theater, but it's the quality is awesome. Please, please, please patronize. I appreciate that, you guys.
Hey,
Okay.
Mel.
Yeah.
But you got to remember, tell the people, one, that everybody got to disable their horns, because people have a tendency of popping their horns when the show going on. That's one. And two, always going to get some person that say, yeah, I bought a VIP ticket, therefore he going in the front, and guess what? He going to come in on high lifted truck that going to block the screen from everybody else. No, you guys stay in the back, okay?
Well,
So.
I will be security that night, and I will have this for those of you. I'm not going to cut you. I'm going to poke your tire. I'm going to poke your 2 tires, so even your spare is not enough, and then you're going to be stuck there overnight. By the way, this is at the Grove Farm Park right there in Puhi. You cannot miss it. Please, 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 let's do this. Doc, I cannot thank you enough. You are an awesome guy, very educated, very fun to listen to. Open invitation anytime you want to come on, even if you want to talk about something other than germs. We welcome you on our show, my friend.
Thank you. Thank you for what you do.
Friday night, guys, 7 o'clock, Feel Good Friday. We got 3 businesses to showcase. Please join us Friday night, guys. We love you all. God bless. Stay safe. Aloha.